Indie Pistol Training and 812 Guns have decided to collaborate to bring you a video on how to clean a Glock pistol. For today's example, we'll be using a Glock 17. Let's go over a checklist of what you'll need to clean your pistol. Some cleaning solvent, today we're using hops number 9, cleaning patches specific to your caliber, a bore brush, some Q-tips, an old cotton rag. What we've got is a t-shirt that's actually been cut up and used as a rag, cleaning rod with a slotted jag, toothbrush, and some lube. Today we're using Slip 2000 EWL. Before we go any further, let's make sure that the pistol is clear. In other words, let's make sure there's no loaded ammunition either in the chamber or in the magazine. The first thing we'll do is remove the source of ammunition, the magazine. Set that off to the side. Then we'll lock the slide back. To lock the slide back, you're going to do a couple of things. One is push up on the slide lock itself. When I say up, I mean up towards the top of the slide. While I'm pushing up on the slide lock with the thumb, I'm going to take my other hand, bring my palm heel against the slide serrations here, and the touch pads of my fingers against the slide serrations on this side. I'm going to pull back on the slide while pushing up on the slide lock at the same time and lock the slide back. I'm then going to physically and visually check to make sure there's not either a round in the chamber itself or inside of the magazine well. Once I'm sure it's unloaded, I'll release the slide and I'll do a press check to make sure there's not a round in the chamber. To disassemble a pistol, the first thing I'm going to do, even though I've just cleared it, is check one last time to make sure there's not a round in the chamber itself and not a magazine in the magazine well. I'm going to point the pistol in the safe direction and pull the trigger. After that, I'm going to bring my thumb high up in the back strap along here, wrap my fingers over the top of the slide so they come in contact with the slide serrations there. I'm going to pull back about a half an inch on the slide. At the same time, I'm going to pull down on the takedown bars on this side and this side at the same time. So I'll pull down, then release the slide, allowing it to go forward. I'll catch it with my one hand. I'll set the frame off to the side. I'll remove the spring, recoil spring, and the guide rod. I'll set that down, the barrel, and the slide. That's all you need to do for disassembly. To actually clean the pistol, what I like to do is start out with the slide. I'll take the slide in one hand and my toothbrush, dip my toothbrush in the solvent, shake out the excess, blot off any extra. Then I'll start scrubbing out the interior of the slide. I'll make sure I get all three sides on the front and the back end. Also make sure I get the breech face and underneath the extractor. The breech face is going to be the portion that the firing pin actually pokes through, down along here. And the extractor, you can see on the outside here, will come in and hook the rim, pardon me, not the rim, but the lip of that cartridge and allow that to extract. I want to make sure I get under those and make sure those are clean. I also want to make sure I get underneath the slide rails, which will be located here, and I'll get to those in a second a little more carefully with a Q-tip. Get that scrubbed out, breech face. Next, I'll take a Q-tip, dip it in my solvent, wring out the excess, and I'll run it underneath the rails on the slide. And depending on how much shooting you've done or how little shooting you've done will kind of depend on how much residue and built up gunk you get out of there. Set that off to the side. When I set my slide off to the side, what I'm going to do is put it so it's oriented this way. That way any excess solvent will drain out. Next, I'll move to the frame and I'll follow a similar process with that. Hit all the large areas and the smaller areas. On the inside, I want to be careful I'm not too rough with moving that toothbrush around in there. I'll take that, I'll set that off to the side. And I'm going over this fairly quickly because the pistol's fairly clean. Depending on how dirty yours is, you may need to spend a little more time on it. Next I'll come to the barrel itself and take my toothbrush again. I'll run along the outside and the back end of it, and I'll pay a little extra attention to the feed ramp itself. The feed ramp is where the bullet's going to come up from the magazine and enter into the chamber. I'll make sure I get that with my toothbrush. And next, I'll get one of my patches, insert it into my slotted jag, dip it into the solvent, wringing out any excess, and I'll run that through the barrel itself. Let that sit off to the side, let that solvent soak in there for a minute or two while I come to the recoil spring and guide rod. It's an encapsulated unit, in other words it won't come apart, so you can leave it as is, and I don't pay a lot of attention or a lot of detail to it because it's got fairly large tolerances. I will wipe it down and check to make sure there's nothing that looks odd about it, and there's nothing that's really built up or trapped inside the coils. Set that back off to the side, come back to the barrel, and I'll switch out my slotted jag with a bore brush. I like using the nylon bristle bore brush that Glock provides. Dip that in the solvent, shake off any excess, and I'll run that through the barrel a few times. I'll make sure I let it come all the way out at the end and not pull it back halfway through. And again, I may do this more or less depending on how dirty the pistol is. First one I'm going to take is going to be a dry brush after. I've usually got a separate cleaning rod set up for this. Take a dry patch and run it through, and I might get a little bit of residue from there. I'll alternate between a dry patch and a wet patch until they come out fairly clean. I'm not looking for perfection in terms of cleanliness, but I want something that's going to be clean. And for the last one, I'll run another patch through there, and it's fairly clean. I'll take that, wipe down the exterior of it, set that off to the side. I'll come back to the slide, which was the first thing that I cleaned. Take my rag and wipe off all the large surface areas that I can get to easily. In front of the breech face, along the front of the slide, and the back. And once I've hit all the larger areas, I'll take a Q-tip, I'll go back in, I'll get smaller spaces that are in there. And one thing I'll do periodically is I'll take a look to check to make sure there's no fibers from the Q-tip being left behind in the pistol. Come over, get the front of the breech face as well, switch ends, make sure I've got most of the solvent out of there, and underneath the rails, and set that off to the side. Come to the frame next, I'll follow the exact same process. Wipe off the larger areas first, along the front of the frame, along the rails, the trigger bar, get into the magazine well as well, from the bottom, and from the top. And again, when I come, after I've gotten the larger areas, I'll go in after some of the smaller crevices with that Q-tip again, and I'll move that trigger bar forward. Now when you move the trigger bar back, you're going to pull the trigger, but before you do that, you want to put a little resistance against that trigger bar. Glock recommends against what's basically dry firing the pistol without the frame in place. Get all the large areas, smaller areas, check to make sure there's no fibers from that Q-tip left behind, and set that off to the side. Come back to the barrel, and I'll hit some of the smaller areas that I didn't hit earlier. Or you could have gotten it earlier and just did it right there. Wipe down that exterior one last time. take a quick look down the barrel, make sure there's nothing obvious there. There shouldn't be after running a few patches through it. And set that off to the side. And that's it for cleaning the Glock. The final step is going to be lubricating and reassembling your Glock. What I like to do is use a couple of Q-tips along with some weapons lube and start out with the slide. At the back of the slide, you see a couple of openings where the slide rails are. They start to run pretty much down the entire length of both sides of the slide. So I'll take a drop of lube, I'll put a drop there, and another drop there. What I'll do is I'll set this off in this orientation for a couple of minutes while I get to the other pieces. What that does is it allows the lube to run down the right side and the left side. Set that off there. I'll come to the frame next, and the frame has a part to it called the connector, which is this small piece of metal that shoots up and off to the right. And I'm going to put a drop of lube just underneath there, and I'm going to work that back and forth using the trigger. And once again, I'm going to put a little resistance against this trigger bar, so when I pull the trigger, I'm not what's basically dry firing it, giving it a little bit of resistance. What I'll do next is I'll take a Q-tip and apply some lube to the end. Make sure it's not sopping wet, but it's more than just moist. I'll take that and I'll add some lube to the rails, front and back, and underneath them as well. Next I'll move to the barrel, and if you can see the portions here where that silver grayish metal is starting to show through, those are some of the contact points where metal is coming into contact with metal. Here it's the barrel is coming in contact with part of the slide. That's a normal part of just the function of the pistol, but you want to make sure you add some lube to that. And under here, set that off to the side. Come back to the slide next, and changing ends on the Q-tip to the dry end, there'll be a small pool of lube that accumulates here and here. What I'll do is I'll just take that Q-tip, sop up the extra, and I'll run it along the exterior of that slide. I'm not trying to dry those rails out, but just get any excess that's there. Switch ends again, and in here, if you can see, there's again more of that silverish gray metal that's shining through where the barrel's coming in contact with the slide. So I'll just add a little lube to that. Take my rag, make sure I've got that excess lube sopped up. It's not going to hurt the pistol. All it's going to do is help keep my clothes just a little bit cleaner. Get that up, take a quick look at it again. Then I'll reassemble the pistol. Also, if you check your owner's manual, there is a section in there about function checking it, but we're going to go ahead and reassemble. Barrel goes into the slide first. Once you hear and feel it click in place, you know it's where it needs to be. The recoil spring and guide rod has two separate ends to it. One is fairly flat, the other one has a domed protrusion that comes out of it. This domed protrusion part is going to go towards the front. What that lets happen is the recoil spring can compress while allowing that guide rod to work its way through the hole in the front of the slide to let the pistol cycle normally. So what I'll do, flat end towards the back, domed end towards the front of the pistol, set it in. Once it's seated, it'll be fairly level with the slide in the barrel, and it's in place. With the Glocks, there's a front rail section and a rear rail section. There's nothing really in the middle between it to keep it on track, so what you want to make sure you do is line up the front and back. Once it's on, make sure that there's not too much of a gap that happens between the frame and the rail. I have actually seen people who have tried to force it in this way and had the slide ride over the rear rail section, and it jammed up the pistol to where it took quite a bit of work to get it undone. So make sure these two pieces stay fairly close together. Remember, if you have to force it, it doesn't really belong there. So once it's in the right place, I'll cycle the pistol, allow it to go forward, it'll lock in place automatically. Do one last press check, and you're finished with lubrication and reassembly. it.